The war that Putin once promised would be swift and distant has now seeped into the heart of Russia itself, twisting everyday life into something unrecognizable. The sounds of explosions that Russians once heard only through filtered news reports are now echoing in their own skies. The fear that was once confined to front lines has spilled into neighborhoods, subways, and apartment blocks. People are no longer watching a war from afar, they are living inside it. In Moscow and other cities, the government's grip on the narrative is slipping. Propaganda can no longer mask the chaos when people can hear the drones above their own homes. What began as patriotic pride has turned into quiet panic. Russian police and emergency officials, symbols of the regime's authority, are now recording TikTok videos teaching citizens how to hide from drone attacks. The irony is striking. The same government that once banned and censored social media now depends on it to keep its citizens alive. These clips, often shaky and hurried, show officers explaining in calm voices what to do if you hear the faint buzzing of a drone. Run for cover, get away from windows, hide underground, stay low to the ground. It's advice meant to save lives, but it also exposes a truth the Kremlin can't spin away. Russia's once vaunted defenses have failed to protect its own people. In the face of that failure, the government's response has been to double down on control. Internet blackouts are spreading across regions under the pretext of disrupting enemy drones. But everyone knows the real reason: information. Putin's administration is trying to choke off the flow of news, videos, and satellite data that reveal just how fragile the situation has become. Yet in cutting communication, they've also cut off lifelines. Jobs, education, businesses, and even access to medicine are being disrupted. Online marketplaces, gig work, and tech platforms that millions relied on have gone silent overnight. Small businesses can't reach customers, students can't attend online classes, and families can't contact loved ones abroad. What began as digital censorship has spiraled into a full-blown economic chokehold. The cracks are widening everywhere. Inflation is climbing, basic goods are harder to find, and the ruble's collapse has made even imported food and medicine luxuries. The once loyal middle class, teachers, engineers, doctors, and IT workers, now finds itself trapped between dwindling wages and growing fear. For many, the only escape has been to leave. Airports are flooded with young professionals clutching one-way tickets, heading anywhere that still offers a sense of stability and freedom. This mass exodus, a quiet but relentless brain drain, has gutted Russia's industries and left hospitals, schools, and tech firms struggling to survive. And for those who stay behind, frustration simmers just beneath the surface. Public protests are swiftly crushed, but small acts of defiance, graffiti, whispered conversations, even anonymous online posts have become symbols of silent resistance. Across the social media platforms outside Russia's borders, the questions are multiplying. How long can Putin keep the illusion of control alive when his people are running from drones and fleeing their own country? Will cutting off the internet isolate the population or ignite the anger that finally turns inward? Could the economic collapse and mass emigration weaken the regime more than any Ukrainian offensive ever could? And if the cracks reach the Kremlin's inner circle, will those closest to Putin remain loyal or turn on him to save themselves? Each passing week feels like a turning point, yet no one knows in which direction the country will fall. The state's silence is deafening, the fear is growing, and beneath it all, a new kind of unrest is starting to take shape, one that doesn't march with banners or slogans, but spreads quietly through the very networks the Kremlin is desperate to shut down. Across Russia, new public service videos are flooding the internet. Grim tutorials warning citizens how to survive drone attacks. Calm, uniformed officers stare into phone cameras and advise people not to touch crashed UAVs because they might be toxic or explosive. Leave immediately, call 112, report the time and location, they say, their tone steady, almost rehearsed. Stay vigilant. Safety begins with you. But behind that official composure lies a sense of absurdity the state can no longer hide. One officer's video ends, and another voice cuts in. A mocking echo that feels more honest than any government broadcast. Citizens of Russia, it begins. If you hear buzzing in the sky, the best way to stay safe is to call your leader and tell him to stop invading another country. The bitter humor spreads faster than censorship can contain it, because everyone knows, if Putin had never launched this war, drones wouldn't be hovering over their cities in the first place. Still, the damage is done. Nearly 40% of Russia's oil refining capacity is crippled after waves of Ukrainian drone strikes, and over 50 regions are now facing fuel shortages. Gas stations have been rationing supplies to a few gallons per driver, while desperate drivers queue for hours under flashing warning lights. In some areas, the government has resorted to importing fuel from Belarus, an irony so sharp it cuts through propaganda like glass. The energy superpower is now begging its neighbors for gas. Yet Putin's answer isn't reform, it's restriction. To confuse enemy drones, he's ordered GPS and cell signals to be jammed across major cities. But that means ordinary Russians can no longer navigate their own streets. One woman, trapped in Moscow's traffic maze, films herself shouting in frustration, her GPS dead, her calls dropping, her sense of direction lost. "I've been driving for an hour," she screams. "I can't turn anywhere. I can't even get to work." Her voice trembles with exhaustion, not just from the chaos on the road, but from the feeling that everything, communication, travel, normal life, is falling apart. The very technology Russia once boasted of mastering has become its own prison. And while the Kremlin blames Ukraine for every blackout, the truth on the ground is far simpler. Putin's war has not just jammed satellites, it's jammed the country itself, leaving millions spinning in circles, unable to find a way out. Ukrainian drones rely on GPS and internet signals to lock onto targets with chilling precision, and they're hitting exactly what they aim for. The tragedy, however, is that it's not the Ukrainian side paying the heavier price, but ordinary Russians caught in the crossfire of their own government's paranoia. Putin's attempt to block drones by jamming communications has backfired spectacularly, strangling everyday life instead of saving it. From the countless clips flooding social media, it's clear that Russians would rather see oil refineries burn than lose their internet connection, a dark symbol of how deep the digital lifeline runs in modern society. But the truth behind all this drone defense talk is far more cynical. Putin isn't trying to stop drones, he's trying to stop dissent. Under the guise of national security, the Kremlin has ramped up censorship, blocking calls on Telegram and WhatsApp, and forcing citizens to download a new state-controlled messaging app called Max, a platform built, owned, and monitored by the government itself. It's surveillance dressed as safety. Through this app, the Kremlin can read messages, trace calls, and map social networks with terrifying efficiency. In other words, Putin no longer pretends to respect privacy. He's simply erased it. Yet many Russians still don't seem to grasp the scale of what's happening. Some even shrug it off, boasting online that they can still stream freely through VPNs, as if pushing a broken car counts as proof that it runs fine. But the crumbling internet is only one layer of a much larger collapse. Beneath the surface, the Russian economy is unraveling at a pace unseen in decades. Massive companies, once proud pillars of stability, are now cutting wages, shortening work weeks from 5 days to 4, and laying off thousands. Paychecks are shrinking by over 20%, and the bonuses that once kept families afloat have vanished as corporate revenues nosedive. For millions, that missing day's pay is the difference between buying groceries or going hungry. Meanwhile, inflation is devouring what little remains. Food prices have surged over 10% for nearly a year straight, and some staples have skyrocketed. Potatoes alone are up 200%. The Russian central bank's official reports try to soften the blow by averaging the numbers, but anyone walking through a market knows the truth. Each week, the same basket of food costs more than the last. For the average citizen, survival has become a calculation, one where even the basics of eating, working, and connecting to the outside world are slipping further out of reach. And while the Kremlin insists everything is under control, the country's silence feels heavier than ever, as if the weight of the Kremlin's lies isn't just crushing Russia's politics, it's squeezing the dinner table too. Take potatoes, for example, the humble heart of the Russian diet. They're not just food, they're identity. In Russia, people call potatoes the second bread because life without them feels almost unimaginable. The country ranks among the top 5 potato consumers in the world, with the average Russian eating nearly 300 pounds a year, double what most Americans do. But in just 12 months, the price of this everyday staple has tripled, marking the steepest jump in over 2 decades. For families already watching their paychecks shrink, that's not just an inconvenience, it's a quiet catastrophe. When a basic food becomes unaffordable, something fundamental in a nation begins to crack. You'd think in times like these, a government would step in to ease the pain, to help people make it through. But in today's Russia, the state's idea of help looks very different. There's a dark joke spreading across the country that captures this perfectly. Russians now compare their government to an alcoholic father. One day, the father comes home and says, "Son, the price of vodka just went up, new tax." The son, relieved, asks, "So, does that mean you'll drink less?" The father sighs, "No, son. It means you'll eat less." That punchline hits harder than ever because it's no longer just a joke. It's daily reality. Under Russia's new 2026 budget, taxes are rising sharply, but the extra money isn't going towards schools, hospitals, or food subsidies. It's being funneled straight into the military machine. Nearly 40% of the entire national budget is now set aside for defense and domestic security. Putin's way of buying loyalty and shielding himself from his own people's hunger. The message is clear. Keep the army fed, even if the nation starves. If you've made it this far into the video, it means you're enjoying what we do here at Euro Bulletin. Take a second to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss more updates and insights from Europe and its partners. Let's dive in more. But even in a country built on silence, defiance has a way of finding its voice. Beneath the layers of propaganda and fear, something restless is moving inside Russia. It doesn't look like the protests of the past, no crowds waving flags or chanting in the streets, but it's there, quiet and deliberate. You see it in the anonymous Telegram channels posting what state media won't. You hear it in the whispers between factory workers who've gone months without pay. You feel it in the coded graffiti that keeps appearing overnight on crumbling apartment walls. Simple messages like, "We're still here," or "Truth outlives fear." Ordinary people are finding subtle ways to fight back in a system that's designed to crush them. Underground journalists, some working from basements, others from exile, risk everything to leak stories about the army's losses, the food shortages, the hospital collapses. A few have been caught, many have vanished. But the stories keep coming, shared and reshared in encrypted channels that the Kremlin still struggles to control. Even inside the state itself, there are signs of fracture. Mid-level officials are beginning to grumble privately. Regional leaders are quietly disobeying orders, and parts of the security apparatus are growing weary of policing their own citizens. In small towns, local police have started ignoring certain arrests, pretending not to see the banned stickers and slogans spreading across street signs. It's not open rebellion, not yet. But it's a shift. A small one, but enough to make the Kremlin nervous. Putin's system was built on loyalty through fear, yet fear is a fragile currency. Once people stop believing it works, it loses its power. And that's what's happening now, slowly, quietly, but unmistakably. Outside observers call it the whisper revolution. It's not organized, it's not loud, but it's spreading. Through VPNs, secret meetings, anonymous emails, and quiet refusals. Teachers sneak banned history lessons into classrooms. Doctors tell patients the truth about the shortages instead of parroting official statements. Even soldiers at the front are sharing messages that sound less like patriotism and more like exhaustion. Bit by bit, the illusion of control is starting to crack. Still, no one knows what comes next. Can these scattered acts of defiance grow into something bigger, or will they be buried before they bloom? Can truth survive in a place where every signal, every post, every whisper is being watched? And if the people who built this system are beginning to lose faith in it, how long before it starts collapsing from the inside? The answers aren't clear yet. But one thing is, the silence in Russia is no longer empty. It's beginning to sound like resistance. The whisper revolution isn't being led by politicians or generals. It's being carried by a generation that never knew life without the internet, yet now finds itself trapped in its absence. These are Russia's digital natives, the 20-somethings who grew up streaming music, learning English from YouTube, and scrolling through worlds that their government said didn't exist. They were raised in a nation built on old ideas, but they think in pixels, not propaganda. And even though the Kremlin has tried to slam every digital door shut, this generation keeps finding cracks to slip through. With VPNs, mirror sites, and coded memes, they're building a parallel Russia online, one that breathes truth while the official one suffocates under lies. Many of them don't see themselves as activists. They're students, gamers, programmers, and artists who just want to live normal lives. But their quiet refusal to play along with state narratives has become its own form of rebellion. Some are leaking documents through anonymous servers. Others are creating satirical art or short films that mock the government's absurd censorship. Even their humor has turned subversive. Jokes that once felt harmless now carry the weight of protest, spreading through encrypted chats faster than the state can delete them. To outsiders, it might look small, but in a system built on silence, laughter itself has become an act of defiance. Older generations, meanwhile, are split. Some remain loyal to Putin, clinging to the memory of a powerful Russia they grew up believing in. Others, parents and grandparents, are quietly proud of their children's courage, even if they never say it out loud. Around kitchen tables, conversations that used to start with fear now end with a fragile kind of hope. People still lower their voices when they talk politics, but they're talking nonetheless, and that alone feels revolutionary. History has seen this before. In the Soviet era, truth lived underground, in banned books passed hand to hand, in songs sung in secret, in whispers behind closed doors. It took decades for those whispers to grow into the roar that brought the system down. Now, history is repeating itself, though in a digital age where silence is harder to enforce. The Kremlin can block apps, shut down networks, and arrest journalists, but it can't erase an entire generation that has seen the world beyond its borders and knows it exists. And that's what scares the regime the most. Not the protests it can see, but the quiet ones it can't. The ones that happen when a student refuses to delete a post, when a teacher chooses to tell the truth, or when a young soldier sends home a message that says simply, "We deserve better." These small choices, scattered across a vast nation, are starting to form something powerful. A conscience too connected to be silenced, and too young to give up. Still, every act of courage carries risk. The walls are closing in, the surveillance tighter than ever. The question now is, how long can this generation keep pushing before something gives way? Can their quiet resistance grow fast enough to challenge the system that watches their every move? Or will fear win once more, forcing truth back into the shadows until the next storm arrives? But while the Kremlin fattens its war chest, the rest of the country is running on fumes. Funding for healthcare has been slashed so deeply that Russia is now teetering on the edge of a medical crisis. Public hospitals are running out of staff, medicine, and equipment. Doctors, overworked and underpaid, are fleeing to private clinics just to survive. Instead of raising salaries or improving conditions, Putin's solution has been to ban doctors from working privately unless they also serve in public hospitals. It's a policy that forces loyalty through exhaustion, a law that solves nothing but makes rebellion illegal. This pattern has become the hallmark of his rule. Whenever something breaks, the fix is to outlaw the evidence of the breakage. But there are some things even Putin can't ban, and one of them is garbage. Across more than 30 regions, Russia is facing a literal waste crisis. Mountains of trash are piling up on city streets because old landfills were never replaced. The projects were approved back in 2019, but the money was rerouted into the war effort instead. 6 years later, the waste keeps coming, and there's nowhere left to put it. Some regions are warning of an imminent garbage collapse, a phrase that's both literal and symbolic of the entire system's decay. Streets smell of rot, local officials are begging for help, and citizens are venting their anger online before their posts vanish into censorship's void. For now, the Kremlin can still hide the truth under new bans and old slogans. But you can't silence the stench of a nation that's rotting from the inside out. So now, Russia stands at a strange crossroads, one where the sound of drones mixes with the sound of empty wallets, and where silence has become more dangerous than speech. The government keeps tightening its grip, cutting off the internet, raising taxes, banning doctors, and building walls around the truth. But how long can a country keep functioning like this before something breaks for good? How long can people watch prices soar, wages shrink, and garbage pile up before they decide enough is enough? History has shown that even the strongest regimes eventually crumble, not always from foreign enemies, but from the quiet despair of their own people. The question now isn't whether Putin can keep fighting Ukraine, it's whether he can keep fighting his own collapsing system. Can a government that fears its citizens more than its enemies ever truly survive? And what happens when Russians finally stop laughing at the jokes and start rewriting them?